Hey soldier, have you got scissors? What do you mean why? If the centurion sees me with this hair, I'm done. You don't have scissors? Pass me the gladius, will you? Hello noble ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and today we are talking about the Netflix series Barbarians again, to explore a little bit more how Roman military encampment, called in Latin Castra, worked. But before doing that, if you like Romans, knights, samurai weapons and armor, become a noble one, subscribe to my channel for more content from the Metatron. In the TV series, we see quite a few times Roman encampments, the Castra. Are they historically accurate? How well are they represented? That's going to be one of the main questions we're going to answer on this video. But the second question is about the scene in the first episode, I believe, when both Fulquin and Tusnelda managed to sneak in the Roman Castra and they steal the Roman eagle and get out. How realistically was that scene represented? How much of a challenge it would have been to get inside a Roman Castra? Right, before getting into the nitty-gritty details, I'd like to underline one thing. Fulquin is a completely invented character, and Tusnelda, okay, so she is historical. She really was Arminius' wife, and she was Segeste's daughter. However, she never stole the eagle. That's not what happened. In fact, we actually see her also in the battle scene. We see her becoming sort of a woman warrior and woman priestess. Well, on the woman warrior, there is no account for that, so that's completely made up for the story, I suppose. They wanted the character to represent this idea of a strong woman who can fight and all that. And of course, yes, there were barbarian, Germanic women who also participated in combat, but not Tusnelda. As far as we know, she just was Arminius' wife. And of course, later on, she will be kidnapped. So there will be situations that will happen, historically speaking. I don't know if they're going to show that in the next season 2. It will be great. You know, it should be like The Empire Strikes Again. That's what they should call season 2, because Rome will be pissed off because of Teutoburg, and they will send 8 legions, and you know, they will retrieve the eagle in history. That will be perfect for a season 2, so I hope they do that. But in general, Tusnelda, she never stole the eagle. In fact, the Cherushi, the tribe, was not the actual tribe that stole the eagle historically. Historically, it was a different tribe that managed to steal the eagle from the Romans, namely the tribe called Sicambri, but they did it in 16 BC, so quite a few years before the Battle of Teutoburg. So there is also a time misplacement, and it is true that the emperor, so in the TV series, Varus sends Arminius to retrieve the eagle. In reality, Emperor Augustus himself sends a man called Drusus to retrieve the eagle. So yes, some things do happen parallel to history, but the situation happened a long time before, and it wasn't Tusnelda who did it. So let's have a look at the camp. Now, to understand how a Roman camp works, of course, we need to read Roman writers such as Vegetius, who tells us a lot of information, also some Greek writers, Polybius. There are quite a few, and it's interesting to look at how they have represented it. So as we look at the first time we see the Roman encampment is when Arminius arrives in Germania, and it's just before he meets Varus himself, and he looks at the encampment, and we see that first of all it has a rectangular shape. So is that correct? Well, the rectangular shape is fine. So generally speaking, a Roman castra, it would be square if it holds 1 legion. It would be rectangular if it held 2 legions. When you have more than 1 legion, what you do is that you have to imagine that the rectangle there is just 2 square forts, one against each other, and they meet in the center. The center is where the praetorium tent would be placed, so the tent of the commander. Now, of course, if you have 2 legions, then you need 2 tents. They are facing each other, and then from there, from where the tents are placed, you would start measuring everything. And the Romans had specialized engineers called architecti who would organize everything. The Romans were so good at building these castra that they could build them even under attack. So you would have the engineers, the architecti, and the soldiers that were building at that time. They were able to build an entire castra with the walls and the ditch and all the gates, everything, in just a few hours, even under attack, because the Roman legion, they were able to defend the builders in full battle formation if needed be. And one thing that we need to remember, and one thing that we can learn, is that Roman encampments always looked the same. And this is important, and we'll have to come back to this information later to also try and see if the reaction of the Romans when one of the tents is burning makes sense, but we'll get back to that. But generally speaking, that was what set the Romans aside. So the Greeks, for example, whenever they would have military encampments, they would just utilize the natural environment, because they believed that using the natural defenses that you would have to your advantage would be a good way to prepare a military camp. And so the camps of the Greeks would always look different because they would adapt to the natural environment. For the Romans, it was the exact opposite. Every Roman fort, it doesn't matter where in the empire, in the republic we are talking about, it would always look the same. And that's in fact one of the characteristics of the Roman Empire. In fact, of an empire, Roman cities all look the same. Roman encampments all looked the same. It's what an empire does. It enlarges itself, replicating its way and Romanizing everything. The Romans would change the shape of the area in order to make sure that they could fit their planned encampments. Now, they didn't only have one. Most likely these Roman engineers would bring with them quite a lot of possible plans, and then they would choose the plan that would fit the terrain better. And of course, they would try to find a location with the explorers, the scouts. They would try to find a location that would fit, possibly with access to water. They would choose their area carefully, and then they would start building. It would be walled. Now, at first glance, this encampment doesn't look walled, but if we look further on shots, we can see that it is. So they have made a wallum, so they have made a wall, and it's actually made pretty well, because Roman walls, the way they did it is that they would dig what in Latin is called fossa, which is basically an entrenchment, all around the camp, if they deemed necessary. So it's not something you have to do all the time, but in enemy territory, most likely they would do that. So the builders, who are still legionaries, I'd like to underline, would then use all the soil that they are digging out to build the fossa. They would place it inward, and on top of these very small, we could call them mini hills that they would create, then they would place the palisades to create a wallum, so basically a wooden wall in this case. Then they would have 4 different entrances. We'll talk about those in a minute. So far I'm happy with the way it looks. They do have the palisades placed on top of these mounds of soil, so it looks like they did their research. But what sort of encampment is this? Because as I said, not only they had many different possible plans depending on the selection of territory that they had, but also they had different kinds of castra. They had castra aestiva, so summer encampment. They had castra hiberna, or winter encampment, and then they had castra sativa, or permanent encampment, and then castra navalia or castra nautica, which would be the navy encampments. So in this case, it's obviously the first. How do I know? Well, first of all, they're using tents, and tents, of course, are something that they would use for these sort of encampments. They usually wouldn't last more than a few days, and then, they would have to pack everything up and move. The idea with Roman encampment is that whenever the legion was entering enemy territory, at the end of the night, they would always go back to an encampment, because that way it wasn't easy to attack the legion while they were sleeping, obviously. And then in the morning, the commander would give the main orders. So he could say, all right, let's pack everything up and we're back on the march, in which case they would do that. They would just, every soldier would take its own tent, and every soldier would take its own building materials, and then every soldier would also take a certain amount of wood that they need to build the wall around it, and then they would move. The generals could say, no, we're going to stay another day. So yeah, these camps could last for a few days before the legion was on the march again. Now, if this was a castra stativa, so the sort of permanent encampments, then the wooden palisade would be replaced by brick walls, stone walls, and also the general buildings would be replaced with wooden buildings and sometimes even stone buildings. But of course, these would be mostly used in winter, because summer was the campaign season, whereas in winter, usually the legions wouldn't be used to conquer, to attack, and do all of those things that legions usually did, unless they were being punished, but that's beyond the point. A castra hiberna would be more of a permanent structure, because they would have to house a legion or legions for a few months. Okay, so this is a castra estiva. The tents are correct. The fact that they placed the wall, even though in this shot it doesn't really look like there is a wall, but if you zoom in, you can see that there is a wall. They did get some things right, but one of the main problems I have is that there are no towers, and we know for a fact that the Romans did build turres, or watchtowers at regular intervals, and they would be placed all around the encampment. So where are the towers? There are no towers in this case, so this is already a little strange. And for the towers, just look at anything written by Titus Flavius Josephus, because he tells us everything about it, and he definitely is very adamant, underlining the presence of both towers and Roman artillery division. But probably the thing that really looks the strangest to me is the main entrance. So every encampment had 4 doors all around its perimeter. As I said, these doors would have towers at regular intervals, so we would have the main entrance called Porta Praetoria, then we would have the door to the right, Porta Principalis Dextra, the door to the left, Porta Principalis Sinistra, and the door at the back, Porta Decumana. The 2 main streets in the encampment would be called Via Praetoria and Via Principalis. Now, from the looks of it, it seems that Fulquin and Tusnelda are entering through the main gate, the Porta Praetoria. But it doesn't really matter what door it would be, every door would be extremely well guarded. What we see here, a couple of legionaries. In reality, Vegetius tells us that there should be at least 10 armed men protecting the gate. Polybius tells us that a general guard watch will be made of 4 soldiers, 1 being a sentry, with constant cavalry swipes. Cavalry auxiliaries constantly passing by, roaming around, checking the entrance, making sure nothing happened. In Republican times, when we had a division, and we didn't have just heavy infantry, so the Roman legionary, but we had principes, astati, triari, acensi, and all the different kinds of Roman soldiers, we would have velites, so the light armored troops that use javelins. We would have at least 10 of those guys roaming and checking the perimeter of the Castra all the time, particularly focusing on the entrances. So you understand how this is the first thing that kind of made me cringe. That looked easy. All you need to do is go up to these 2 guards, say hello in Latin, salve, 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 good looking girl, yeah, good looking girl, pulcherrima, see, okay. I mean, that is, oh gosh, that was bad. The sort of punishment that these soldiers with guard duty would face is atrocious. And generally speaking, a watch guard duty would last about 3 hours. So probably these guys were almost done anyways, or even if they had just started, they just needed to stay there and keep watch for 3 hours and then they go back to sleep. Why would they risk their lives just to let a guy in without having been informed? In the Roman army, everything had to receive a specific order. You couldn't just do stuff because someone else tells you to. So that looks extremely unrealistic. They should have come up with something a lot more clever. Also, another thing missing is that around the perimeter of a Roman vallum, or the wall, there should be something called intervallum, a clear space that was used to catch enemy missiles. It would be a zone that legionaries could rapidly cross to man the walls when needed, and they would also use it to keep cattle or any kind of plunder, so it had storage space as well. I don't really see this here. I just see the tents packed all together and right next to the trees in the forest, which is very unusual for a Roman encampment. Also, back on the gates, Roman encampments had quite a few different possible versions, and since we are in the 1st century, we should see either titulum, clavicula, and agricula. These are 3 different kinds of gates. So in the movie, we just see an opening, and just an opening flat with 2 soldiers, you just walk through it. In a titulum style gate, which we know for sure it was used all the way up to the times of Septimus Severus, the main gate will be detached from the vallum of about 60 feet. In a sort of asymmetrical way. This was done to slow down the attack of incoming raiders. It would be easier for the Roman soldiers to prepare and counterattack. We would have a similar situation with the gate clavicula style. It would be lateral and again 60 feet detached from the rest of the wall to make soldiers enter from the side, enemy soldiers. And it's interesting because by the way it was engineered, as they would come out from the gate and enter the encampment, they would have to force purposefully do so by showing their right side, which means the side without the shield. In the Agricola style game, the situation went even further, and it looked like a funnel, which of course was done to prevent an entire crowd to enter, but they would have to go inside this funnel, which of course made it easier again for the Romans to defend. So there is a lot that goes into the defenses and the battlements of a Roman camp that I don't see here. Here it just looks like something that you enter, say a couple of stupid things, get in, and even the way they get out, and that's why I was saying at first we'll have to get back. When the tent burns, when first and foremost, of course, it's not a nice thing that the tent is burning, but it's not something that you would panic over, like you see the soldiers running around and not knowing what to do, running towards the tent. That wouldn't be something you panic about, because the Roman tents were always placed at a certain space between one and the other to prevent fire from spreading. They thought that, obviously, they thought of that. So yeah, a tent is burning, big deal, we lost a tent, but it's not going to burn the entire encampment. So I don't see why the Roman soldiers are panicking. Also, the Roman soldiers don't seem to know where they're supposed to go. Instead, the barbarians, Fulquin and the other guys, the two guys dressed as Romans, they just know where to go. You just walk straight and get out. So whenever Arminius says that the camp is now closed, they should go to man the gates. Instead, the gates are completely left without anyone, and the barbarians just walk out as if it were nothing. That scene is really, really stupid. They should have showed something whereby they were struggling, they were trying to get past, they had to find a way to make sure that the guards didn't see them, they had to sneak their way out. Instead, they just walk out as if it were nothing. And the two barbarians dressed as Romans, I mean, they don't even have armor, they just have the cloak, and they have the helmets. You can see they've got massive beards, you can see they've got long hair. Obviously they are not Roman, so how don't the Roman soldiers see them? Why don't they arrest them? I wish they put a bit more effort into representing the scene in a way that made us feel, wow, look at what they managed to pull out. Look at what they managed to do. It's so difficult to do what they did, but they still did it anyway because they're amazing. This is how this scene was supposed to be made, in my humble opinion. Instead, by the way they made it, it looks like, oh, look how stupid the Romans were. Look how easy it is to, like, all that effort to make these encampments, and then it's just a piece of cake. Just walk in, burn whatever, walk out. No, that's not how it would have been. Anyhow, apart from that, you know, I enjoyed the show. The Roman encampment, I think it could have been represented better. But what do you think? Did you enjoy the show Barbarians on Netflix? Did you like it? And are you enjoying this series on my channel? This is already the 4th iteration. If you haven't checked out the early ones, I speak about both the general historical accuracy of all the events that unfold during this show, but I also, on my first video, but I also talk about the Latin spoken, which was a collaboration with Scorpio Martianus, where we examine the sort of both pronunciation, language and word usage used by the actors in the movie. I've made one speaking about what it meant to be a barbarian at that time, again looking at the historical sources to understand what it meant from a Roman perspective when they called other people barbare. And if you like this series, I will continue because there are still a lot of things that I'd like to talk about. Alright, number ones, well, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please remember thumbs up, and if you're not yet members of this community, become a number one. Subscribe to my channel for more content from the Metatron. Thank you very much indeed for watching, and remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Valete. Gratias tibiago.